Welcome to part 3 of the many inconsistencies of Megaman X6. For this video, we'll be discussing all of the game stages and alternate paths. Apologies for taking so long, but experiencing the levels is similar to descending into madness. Before we discuss the stages in detail, I believe it's apt to start discussing from a general perspective. The visual designs are pretty hit or miss. There are some that looks good, and then there are others that feels lazy and too simple. I'm not saying they're horrible, but they aren't the best to behold. Don't get me wrong, all stages look different enough to not look the same, but it certainly feels like they were trying to fulfill a checklist instead, which I'll get to later. As for the actual level design, well, it's all over the place. Remember how in the previous parts I kept on mentioning that the game doesn't feel suited for playing as X? Yeah, the level design definitely lives up to that. If you analyze and pretentiously deconstruct them, they only fall into two categories: an actual level or a freaking hallway. This is a major disappointment considering the stages stand out. They have gimmicks that make them memorable, for better or for worse. And it's also a punch to the face on the Megaman series and to the fans since this is an action platformer. Games like this make you go from the start to the end of a level, but by God, it isn't just going from left to right or top to bottom. You can argue that previous Megaman games have levels designed like hallways, but at least they put enough rooms, pathways, and level constraints that it doesn't feel like a hallway. X6 fails to do that, making it obvious that some levels are just straight lines. Another thing about the level design is the lack of verticality. When I say verticality, I mean going from top to bottom as a way to traverse through a section of a level. I'm not talking about wall climbing over a bottomless pit, nor am I talking about just haphazardly falling through one. I mean actual platforming. The sad thing is, the amount of vertical sections can be counted using one hand alone. What's worse is for the vertical sections that do exist, it's plagued by a lot of problems like stupid enemy placement, cheap instant kill situations, or camera problems. As I mentioned in the previous video, you need the jumper part if you want to finish all of the mandatory stages as X. For Zero, you don't need to. He has everything from his basic movements to the special weapons he gets. This is not good game design, and definitely not good level design. Here's the thing, in games like Megaman X6, where there are 6 ways to play a level, the level should be playable by all characters from start to finish. It is unavoidable that some levels will be easier when played in a specific way, but that's not the point. The level should be able to accommodate the capabilities of each method. This means that there should be compromises. However, compromises should be thought out properly, or else the levels will become stale and repetitive. This applies not only to the Megaman series or action platformers, but to games in general. We can't simply assume the player won't have the gall to play the base form of a character. Whether we like it or not, that also has to be accounted for, else the gameplay loop can't gracefully end, and nothing pisses off a player more than being unable to finish a level when it's not their fault. Let's dive into the levels by starting with the intro stage. Personally, I think people tend to dismiss the intro stage for any game. To be fair, some games design their intro stage to be done quickly to pave way for the game's content. X6's intro stage is designed like that, but still successfully meets what an intro stage should do. This boils down to introducing the main gameplay features and letting the player learn and get used to the game's controls. The level design isn't bad, and is arguably one of the best level designs in the whole game. The starting point is a massive area where the player can mess around with the controls and learn some of the movement. Then, as you progress, they place enough enemies that are either just there or fully obstructing the way, teaching players which fights to pursue. You also encounter new obstacles such as the boxes or the big rotating enemies that can only be damaged by the saber. There's also enough platforming that you can experiment on dashing and jumping, and there's enough vertical sections for the player to get used to wall climbing. Lastly, it introduces entities that are invulnerable to damage, teaching players about things you can't solve with a weapon. There's no gimmick, it's just a simple good level. It's such a shame that despite starting well, the rest of the levels and features managed to overshadow the intro stage. Time for the 8 main stages. Earlier, I stated that it feels like a checklist was being fulfilled while playing through the stages, and it certainly shows with the 8th. For instance, we have a jungle area, a fire area, and an ice area. Things that are stables or obvious choices for game levels. To be fair, this instance is present in most games, so I won't harp on it too much. Anyways, for X6, you can't help feel this was the case, especially if you've played the previous entries. But to give credit where it's due, each level has its own features, and no one is similar to the other. It's just that the gimmicks themselves can range from annoying to rage-inducing. To start off, let's discuss the Amazon area. I would like to call this stage Missed Opportunity, since structurally, the level is sound. But for some reason, there were decisions that severely damaged the integrity of the level. One major deal breaker is the enemy called the Nightmare Insect, and its placement throughout the stage. This green pain in the neck comprises a majority of enemy types, aside from the Nightmare virus, and are placed everywhere in groups. These mantis-like enemies don't fully die when destroyed unless you are using the Yammer option, the weapon you get by beating the stage boss. Anyways, it loves to spawn mini-bugs and fires its fangs as a boomerang projectile. The next deal breaker is atrocious enemy placement. The level has numerous narrow paths, and for some reason, said paths are filled with enemies with little breathing room. The last deal breaker is the camera. Now this isn't really a problem with the level design since the camera is a separate entity, but it doesn't help when things are hidden beyond the camera. To be fair, X6 isn't the first game to struggle with the camera and visibility, especially in vertical sections. But you'd think they've solved this by now. I myself don't have a foolproof solution, but I think not placing one-hit kill obstacles is a good start. This could have been a good level. The layout is great and makes sense. It's ironic that the death of this stage was its contents and what they did in the level. Second stage is Inami Temple, or as I call it, Missed Opportunity 2 Rainy Turtaloo. Like Amazon area, there are some choices that puts down the good design of the level. The level design is okay, but I do acknowledge some parts of it that might not go well with some players. The primary gimmick of this stage is the acid rain that slowly trickles down our HP. The rain will only persist until you destroy the rain-making machine in each section. To destroy the machine, you need to search and destroy your red orbs scattered around the area. The orbs shield the machine, making it invulnerable to your attacks. The orbs are distinct and not easy to miss, however the sections get longer and the placement of each orb gets farther apart. Despite that, the acid rain isn't a big issue as it won't really kill you as fast as the numerous bottomless pits or the numerous enemies that populate the screen, God help me. Not to mention this hulking purple robot that will defend itself when it's not attacking. It's so big that it will halt your progress in really tight spaces. The last area of this level is also the worst, since it's just one room with narrow hallways. This room combines everything that is wrong with the level. Again, another missed opportunity. Third stage is a Laser Institute, the first example of a hallway. This is also one of the shortest levels in the game if you are going for the boss. The first gimmick of this stage are the invisible platforms that only appears twice if you're not aiming for the alternate path. Such a great gimmick. You'd think that a majority of the stage is gonna be riddled with it. Instead, it's a side gimmick. The real main gimmick are the lasers and the reflectors, which are used to open the doors for further progression. The main issue with the lasers is that as you progress, it's like they're placed in situations where you have no choice but to get hit, so you can't experiment with them properly. My personal gripe is not with the lasers, but with the reflectors. The first set of reflectors show that they don't change their angles despite getting hit by the player, but the subsequent ones do. There is nothing in the sprites nor other visual cues that helps in differentiating between the two types, but the developers made a different sprite for different laser gun types. Sure, fine, whatever. Fourth is the Central Museum, which can be summarized by two words: totem poles. There are 4 totem poles in the level. At first, they appear as holograms. Contacting it will send you to a random part of the stage. This randomness is what pisses a lot of players and breaks this level. Let me explain the randomness. It's random in that you don't know which room you'll be sent to, making level exploration a damn chore. However, there are only 6 rooms to choose from, and since there are only 4 totem poles, well, you can do the math. This means you have to replay the level multiple times to successfully explore all 6 rooms. If you're unlucky, you might get the same rooms for the previous run, resulting in another replay. This also means you might not be able to get the light capsule or the heart tank on the first run, which is always nice. It's worth mentioning that the rooms you go through won't change when you die. However, the layout of the room will change. The differences are really minute, but it won't be the same. A stupid thing about this level is if you remove the totem poles, it's just one winding hallway, possibly shorter than the Laser Institute. Fifth stage is the Weapon Center. another contender for shortest level in the game. This level can be summed up as Short Level 2 Hallway Boogaloo. The only platform is the floor you're standing on, and that's it. No floating or moving ones. There is no level design, only a long hallway. The main gimmick is Illumina, the giant robot in the background that attacks you. The only way to stop Illumina is to destroy the power cables that hold the player's progress. Illumina by itself isn't a threat. It's a nuisance if anything. It also doesn't help that there are also a lot of enemies on the screen like the Nightmare Virus or the Flying Birds that are in groups of 5. I feel dishonest for calling this a stage or level. Up next is the North Pole area. If you thought you'll have a hard time with movement, then you're right. It doesn't help that in the previous X games, you can move in ice levels just fine, but whatever. Amazingly, the level layout isn't a hallway and it's actually okay. Sadly, one questionable design choice stops the level from being good. You start the level with a bunch of slopes that tries to slow down the player. The slopes aren't a problem, it's the avalanche that's the problem. Massive ice blocks will spawn from nowhere and fall towards the player unless he hides in whatever small safe spot can be used. This won't be the first time as the ice blocks are a mainstay to the level. After that, you get to platform between pillars of ice with falling ice blocks, another section with slopes and falling ice blocks, and finally, the stupid ice block puzzles. Cubes of ice fall from a random location and only sheer luck will help you. If you're unlucky, it won't give you a way out. The last set of ice block puzzle involves ice falling in columns of 4, leaving one spot open for the player to escape from. Considering the level hampers some of the movement, this is harder to do than it looks. Get crushed by the ice and you'll receive a massive amount of damage. Fail to jump out and the last spot will be magically occupied by an ice block instantly killing you. It's stuff like this that makes a competent stage become a huge thorn on the player's side. This level could have been the right amount of challenging, but the numerous hindrances damage the real difficulty of this stage. The 7th stage is Magma Area, or as I like to call it,
another one.
Or
oh shit, here we go again.
Because of one simple thing. This red giant mechanoid called the Nightmare Snake. You'll fight this Ouroboros wannabe not once, not twice, not thrice, not 4, but 5 freaking times. Who the heck thought this was a good idea? Most people consider this the worst stage because of this enemy, and that says a lot about it, mind you. This thing has 4 green orbs for weak spots. Hit it enough times and it'll break. The fights are easy, in theory. The reality is that it isn't, not because of the enemy, but because of the rooms you'll be fighting in. The rooms aren't even creative. It's either bland and simple, or let's send the player to hell. Oh, and fun fact, that purple fire will instantly kill you in this section, but it won't in the boss fight. Hello? Consistency, where are you? If you're wondering why I'm so fixed on the damn thing, it's because this takes up almost 85% of the level. The remaining 10% is for that one part with the flamethrowers, which are, oh my god, actual level design. And the last 5% is for the way to the alternate path. You'd think that already having a stage revolve around a gimmick miniboss would stop them from creating another one, but I'm sorely mistaken. The last of the 8 stages is the Recycle Lab, the main rival of Magma Area, 4 words level. This stage can be summarized in 2 words, Crusher Level. A majority of this stage is spent under an instant kill crusher. You're probably thinking, it is what it sounds, why are you complaining? Yes, if you don't escape the crusher, you will obviously die. The main problem is when you are ducking. For some reason, releasing down on the D-pad will kill you. In most games, doing so won't kill you because you can't stand up. You'll stay ducked until things let up. In X6, your character decides, I'm not afraid of a freaking ceiling, and decides to show it his boss. It's like they forgot to program staying crouched. The first crusher segment isn't that bad since you can jam the crusher by leaving the right armor in a certain spot. Why can the right armor do this? It's as if the collision box wasn't done nor programmed properly. We also shouldn't be celebrating that we can jam the crusher. This is instead proof of how irritating the crusher is. The crusher is nothing but a sign of false difficulty. The second crusher segment can't be jammed, meaning you have to go through as intended. If that isn't enough, you'll start to encounter extensions to the crusher. The amount of stupid enemy placement doesn't help. Enemies are placed in situations where you have to rush through small hallways, else you'll get crushed. The final crusher segment includes a conveyor belt to slow down the player and instant kill spikes attached to the crusher. No kill like overkill. I've heard some people like this stage, and more power to you, but can you really blame those who hate it? Outside of the Crusher, is there anything wrong with the level? Essentially, it's a hallway. Yeah. After the 8 is the final set, the castle stages. In X6, there are gate stages, and there are 3 in total, 4 if you remove the wall on your eyes. The gate stages are the final gauntlet against the game's antagonists. They contain most of the mechanics of the previous stages, and essentially become an application of things you learn throughout the game. The gate stages can't be revisited. If you thought they were going to give you a fair challenging experience, you're wrong. The level design and enemy placement can be summarized as unnecessarily ruthless, and the experience isn't satisfying. Instead, it feels like a punishment for having the gall to play up to this point. Another thing I want to mention isn't necessarily about the level design, but the graphical design. They all look the same with only little differences in between. I understand they need to have a unifying look, but it ends up as lazy and cheap. The differences aren't creative, and it seems like not enough effort was put into it. Let's kick it off with Gate Stage 1. The start is really cool since it starts with the wreckage of the colony Eurasia, sporting level designs from X5's intro stage. You leap of faith into a huge hole, move further, and see the infamous wall of spikes. This is the best example of leading jumper to be able to finish the stage as X. Again, good level design makes it so a level can be finished by any character from beginning to end. This spike wall already stops the level's chance at being considered a good one. I know it sounds like nitpicking, but the rest of the level doesn't help with the case either. After the vertical section, you get to enjoy slopes with pitfalls in between and little to no safety, so expect to get hit a lot. Then there's another vertical section followed by a hallway that follows the design choice of throwing everything in the kitchen sink but Gate himself. Past the hallway is a room where we are introduced to our good old friend, the Lava of Death, now sporting a red color. The instant kill lava will persist throughout the remainder of the stage. Let that sink in for a moment. The remaining parts of the stage involve traversing through paths where the lava is present. There is also a slow auto-scrolling section where the level is full of icy slopes and you can't see the spikes that are on the walls. Great! Gate Stage 2 is a weird one. It's basically 2 stages forced into one package. Why the developers didn't decide to split them up, we will never know. For convenience, I'll call the first half Part 1 and the second half Part 2. Part 1 is essentially Return of the Spiked Walls and Revenge of the Totem Poles. You start with a vertical section with ropes and spiked walls. After that nightmare is a quick hallway filled with enemies and little to no breathing room, and a floor littered with bottomless pits. Past this is a giant 2-section room filled with totem poles and spiked walls. This whole room is a remainder of Part 1, and the end of the room is a narrow hallway with spikes and moving platforms, making it stupidly difficult to get through. This is an example of false difficulty. There isn't a problem with putting instant kill obstacles in a game. If anything, that's a test for the player. However, there is such a thing as exercising restraint and not just putting instant kill obstacles because final level. You know, actual level design. Part 2 is unique. It starts off simple and safe until you reach the blue portal. What's beyond the portal depends on which character you're using. Before talking about the paths, I would like to mention that Part 2 is shorter and albeit saner than Part 1. If you're playing as X, then prepare for Inami Tempo PTSD. This section requires actual platforming due to the floating platforms and jumps to be made. Sadly, this part also needs jumper if you're playing X with no air dash. Besides that, this part is fun and fast. If you're playing at 0, then welcome back Crusher segments. There are 3 parts of this section, with each part crushing lower than the last. For the last part, it crushes down to the floor, forcing the player to wall jump to escape death by bottomless pits, and surviving the annoying birds from Weapon Center. This is really unfair since the crusher is already forcing you to hold for dear life. Anything else added is just bull. The paths will teleport you to the final hallway leading to the boss fight. Gate Stage 3 is the last level. Unlike previous gate stages, it starts off tame and simple. You need to get past a vertical section by falling down the right place. It doesn't help that there are spikes attached to some walls, leveraging the camera's incapability of showing everything in the vertical section. After this is the boss rush, a staple of the series. As a quick complaint, the placement of the teleporters are really convoluted for no real reason, unlike in previous games where they are placed in an orderly manner. After the boss rush is the final stretch, one big hallway filled with enemies from the previous gate stages. You get to do some last-minute platforming and possible last-minute deaths thanks to the spike walls. I find it funny that Gate Stage 3 can't utilize any of the instant kill gimmicks of the previous levels, so it decides to go the classic method of hiding stuff behind the camera for easy cheap deaths. I don't think there's anything more to mention about the Gate stages. The minutes spent on discussing them portray how unnecessarily difficult they are thanks to the unneeded mechanics that take away from a possibly good experience. The main point to take away from the discussion of the stages is that they are the bread and butter of any game. They comprise a majority of the gameplay and experience. Messing stages spells doom for every other mechanic and feature dependent on them. The final part of this video are the alternate paths. The alternate paths are the optional paths you can take instead of fighting the intended Maverick. At the end of an alternate path, you'll find an optional boss. I won't be discussing the bosses, but I would like to mention that there are 3 optional bosses. To access an alternate path, you need to find and touch a blue crystal portal. You'll know you're in an alternate path from the graphical differences. Finding the portal isn't hard. Sometimes it's just there and sometimes you need to move fast enough to get to it. I know I said that the paths are optional and you fight optional bosses, but trust me when I say these paths are not optional. The paths contain Dr. Light capsules, heart tanks, sub-tanks, and reploids with special parts. What makes it worse is there's no way to exit out of an alternate path even if you've already finished it. The only way to get out is to deplete your lives or beating the optional boss. As for the level design, they range from non-existent to having more level design than their counterpart. Only the 8 Maverick stages have alternate paths. Let's start with the Amazon area. You reach the alternate path by going to the upper path after entering the blue cave. The upper path is a tight hallway filled with enemies and little to no breathing room. Past the hallway is this long vertical drop. Hug the right wall and you'll fall into the portal. The alternate path can be summarized as pillars and pitfalls. The only platforms are tall pillars and everything else is a bottomless pit. The main problem with this path is if you're playing a character with no air dash, well, you won't be able to finish it. Like the main stages, this is a stupid design. I don't care if this is an alternate path, this also needs some thought and elegance in execution. Luckily, this is the only alternate path with no incentive nor reason to go into. Next is Inami Temple. The way to the portal is in the final room behind one of the spikes. The alternate path is one big room similar to the final section of the main stage. The acid rain gimmick is still here. Unlike the room from before, there is no rope or space at the center of the room. Instead, the layout is similar to a staircase with each step interchanged with another. The path also takes advantage of the problematic camera as you can successfully land into a pit of spikes from a jump. This room is actually harder to traverse compared to its main stage counterpart since there are no ropes, and without the jumper part, it seems like your maximum jump height is cutting it close. This room still has a problem of having the screen filled with enemies for little to no breathing room. Third is Laser Institute. To get to the portal, you need to head down and solve the laser puzzle. It involves manipulation of the reflectors so that the lasers reach the door at the end of the room. Beyond the door is the path to the portal. The alternate path is extremely different when compared to the main stage. There are no reflectors and there are more spikes and bottomless pits. There's also some ropes to traverse the bottomless pits. It's an actual level compared to the main path, and it's as if most of the time was spent on this path instead. It's still a hallway though. Central Museum is next, and it has the most irritating portal to get to thanks to the randomness of this level. There is no assurance that you will get teleported to the room which contains the portal. You'll know it's the one when it starts with a ladder that goes upward to a hallway which you have to move from right to left. The alternate path of Central Museum is just one big room with a winding path. You start moving from the outer parts of the level and then you go inwards until you reach the boss door. Compared to most alternate paths, this one is the simplest and most sensible. It's also better than the main stage. Next is the Weapon Center with the worst alternate path. You get the portal by beating Illumina. If you thought the main stage had no level design, then the alternate path turns it up to 11. The alternate path is worse in a hallway. It has no level design. At the start, you can move to the left to get a Dr. Light capsule and a heart tank. As for the actual direction, there are ropes and a bottomless pit. That's the whole alternate path. It doesn't help that there are hostages floating in mid-air while you have to do it the hard way. As an added bonus, this could be the most infuriating section for Zero, since one of his special attacks involves holding up on the D-pad and pressing square while in mid-air, and you hold onto the rope by holding up on the D-pad. Oh, and the special attack can't be cancelled, it only stops when Zero touches the ground. What fun! Up next, the North Pole area, home to the jumper part. To get to the portal, you need to play the stage with the Nightmare Fire on. One of the ice walls will be destroyed, giving access to a room with a heart tank and EX tank. The alternate path is the antithesis of the first section of the main stage. The slopes are facing downward to the right, hoping that the player either falls in one of the bottomless pits or spike traps. Near the end of the section, you can go left to rescue the Reploid with the jumper part. After that is Magma area with an alternate path that has more level design than the main stage. You can get to the portal by climbing up to the top of the room with 2 doors. It's a bit tricky to get past the 2 ledges without the proper parts or nightmare effect. Past that is the final stretch of the portal. The alternate path is the embodiment of verticality in level design and looks similar to the flamethrower field section of the main stage. This is probably one of the best designed alternate paths in the game. However, that doesn't mean anything considering its main stage is one of the worst designed levels. It's disappointing that they can dedicate enough resources and thought to make an actual level in this path, but decide to leave the main stage to the fate of our Red Donut mini-boss. The final stage is Recycle Lab. To access the portal, you have to continue going left instead of going down the ladder in the second Crusher section. Quick rant, I find it stupid that the portal graphics for part 2 of the main stage and the alternate paths are the same. After going left, you go down the ladder, fall from a height, and have to go through a huge gap. The alternate path is essentially part 2 of the main stage except you have a ride armor. It's one long auto-scroller. If you think the ride armor will help you survive, well, that's debatable. On one hand, the ride armor is a liability as it moves slow. On the other hand, it makes sure you don't get crushed. But the section tries to crush the ride armor from a different angle if you're not prepared. They can't even give the player a break. The alternate path is a cool idea on paper, but as we all know, execution is what matters and they were not executed well. It could have been a nice break, something off the beaten path. Instead, it becomes an extension of the problems with the main stages. There isn't anything wrong with making alternate paths thematically the same with its counterpart, but there has to be something that makes it stand out and feel new. Not a new way of torture, but a new good experience. For the next part, we'll be ending the game analysis by talking about the bosses and the special weapons you can get. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.